There was a stretch of my life where no one was disappointed in me. I know most people would think, okay, what's the problem there? Most people would call that a success, right? Everyone thought I was doing great. And so did I. My boss, my family, my friends. And then, I don't know, then it hit me, right? No one was expecting anything bold from me either. From the outside, if I was at a cocktail event or reception or party, my life really required no explanation. I could tell my life story and would make perfect sense to anyone who was listening. It followed that common theme or that narrative or that storyline that we all know by heart, right? You get educated, you get established, you stay respectable, and you don't take any unnecessary risks or chances. Which I realize sounds like a ridiculous problem to have. There is absolutely nothing wrong with wanting stability. No, there's not. There's nothing wrong, of course, with wanting a steady income, with wanting certainty, with wanting respect, with wanting predictability, right? For a lot of us, those are things that are hard won, hard fought for. And sometimes they come after a significant amount of sacrifice, a significant amount of survival, and real hardship. So this isn't a critique of wanting any of those things. No, definitely not. It's more of an opportunity to reflect on what happens after you get those things. Because I feel like at some point, without really announcing itself, a life that makes sense can stop asking anything of you. Right? Not because you failed or not because something is broken, but because everything is working as it should. And that's really when a different type of question starts to surface. It's not, what do I need to fix? But it's more about, what am I choosing not to risk now that everything in my life is working perfectly, beautifully? And for me, that question followed me, especially in particular after we returned back from our family's trip around the world. Because I feel like when you travel, like really travel, you see things that you can't unsee. You see hunger, starvation, yes, you see scarcity, but you also see ingenuity, innovation. Although, actually, I hate using that word innovation, or dislike using that word innovation. You see creativity, you see ambition, right? You see people with far less security in their lives willing to stake far more. And I don't think it's because they're reckless, but I think it's because they don't see standing still as an option. I think about tiny Estonia. Geographically, it's a small, tiny European country, right? But they chose to reimagine how government works. They've digitized everything, right? Instead of complaining about their size or their lack of geography or all the other problems and challenges, being close to a very much more prominent country like Russia, right? They decided to focus on, let's figure out what is the problem that we need to solve. And it's about making sure that we can provide seamless access to government services digitally. I think about South Korea, a country that has completely rebuilt itself in a single generation. It has bet relentlessly on education and innovation. There we go with that innovation word again. Right? Despite having so many problems around their own democracy, at the highest levels. I think about the Netherlands, a country where nearly two-thirds of its entire landmass sits at or below sea level. That's crazy. But they've refused to accept geography as their destiny, like Estonia. Right? It's not because any of this was easy. It's not because the risks disappeared, but it's because they decided that the greater danger was maintaining the status quo, standing still. None of these countries are perfect. You're probably hearing me riff off these countries, and there's just three countries that came to mind because of either work I've done in those countries or time I've spent there. But none of these countries are perfect. Of course not. Because I can already hear the objections forming as I'm riffing off these countries, right? Yeah, but do you really know what's going on in there? Have you talked to the citizens of those countries? Are they really happy? You know, Charles, they've got their own problems too. Sure, those are great countries, but look at their flaws. And I don't know, that reaction starts to bother me. And it's not because the criticism is wrong. No, what place in the world is perfect? But it's because it brings the whole conversation back down to a level that feels safer for us. So what do I mean by that? As human beings, we are very good at poking holes at other people's progress. Because if we think that if we can shrink their ambition, we don't have to confront our own. And I saw this play back at home. You know, when we returned back from our trip around the world with our family, one of my neighbors, a dad in the community, had asked me what we were going to do after the trip. What were we planning on doing? What was I planning on doing? Are you going back to work? What was the next step? And I said, I'd left my previous role, but I had been thinking a bit about writing a book. No, I wanted to share what I'd learned about pausing and the power of pausing and perspective. And I could just see the look on his face just get so sullen and so serious and almost a bit disappointed. And just shaking his head and saying, "Oh, Charles, you're not going to make any money doing that." And I don't think he meant it as a way to discourage me. I think what he was doing was something that's very human, right? When we see someone step outside the script, step outside the box, move and change lanes, it unsettles the people who decided to stay inside the box, in their particular lane, on that same script. Because sometimes we pull people back not because they're wrong, but it's because their movement forces us to look at our own choices. I believe that. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that, more so, because I find that it's rarely loud when people provide these comments, or it's rarely malicious. At least from my experience, it hasn't been malicious. It shows up as a concern, right? As advice, as insights. I'm using air quotes for those of you who are, are listening, right? People will say, be careful. Are you sure this is the right time, Charles? Don't, you've got a family. Don't throw away everything you've built. Those words all sound pragmatic, practical, responsible, right? Don't change the rules, Charles. Don't make the rest of us feel uncomfortable about ourselves. Don't force me to revisit the choices I've already explained away to myself and to other people. And listen, I'm not going to throw stones at glass houses because if I'm honest, I've done the same thing to other people. Of course I have. I'm human. Because sometimes when we say that, I'm just being practical, what we really mean is I don't want to question my own choices. Because if someone else can step outside the script, step outside the box, choose a different lane, it forces this quiet question for us to think about. Why didn't I? Why didn't I do that? And that question, why didn't I, can feel so uncomfortable. More uncomfortable than watching someone else bet on themselves. That's the part we don't talk about. It's not failure. It's not struggle. But it's this moment that you realize that staying put was a decision at a particular point in time. It's not destiny. Listen, I'm not asking you to quit your job or to chase some reckless dream. Like, who am I to tell you to do that? But it's about being more honest with yourself. And asking yourself the question, like, what am I doing with the stability that I've worked so hard to build? Am I using it to protect myself? Or am I willing to spend it on something that actually asks something of me? Something that matters to me. Because safety, security, stability isn't meant to be hoarded. No, it's meant to be leveraged. It's meant to give you room to attempt something meaningful without being destroyed if it doesn't work. And when your stability only protects your comfort, it slowly erodes your purpose. I so strongly believe that. So the question I'm sitting with now isn't, what do I want to do next? It's, what version of myself did I quietly agree to stop becoming? Think about that question and think about how it applies to your own life.